Bishop, Reverend clergy, Mona and Marjorie, the entire Byrd family. If you didn't already know it, it's pretty clear the incredible esteem your father was held in. I know you've known that your whole life. To my fellow members of the Senate, you know, I was telling the president when I got elected the last time, and I had the great honor of running with the president, and I was elected vice president and United States senator in the same day for my 7th term. And in talking to, and I got sworn in for that 7th term because we thought we might need a vote there in those first couple weeks. And every time I sat with a leader, I never called Senator Byrd Senator. I always called him leader. When I sat with a leader, I could see that look in his face, and he said, "Joe, you sure you're making the right decision giving up the Senate for vice president?" Because as the senators know, he revered the Senate. As Danny Inouye said going into the chamber when we were going in to honor your father, yesterday we walked in together. He said, "You know, Joe, had you stayed, you'd be number 2. I'm still number 2, Danny. I'm still number 2. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. President, yesterday I had the opportunity to pay my respects to Leader Byrd as he lay in repose in the Senate chamber. I met the family then and again today, and the last time that happened was 50 years ago. The last time that that chamber I revere served as a resting place for anyone was 50 years ago. But although I and my colleagues behind me revere the Senate, Robert C. Byrd elevated the Senate. Other great men and their families would have chosen for them to lay in state in the rotunda. But Bob Byrd and his family chose to lay in state in the Senate chamber. And to me, this is completely appropriate, having served with them for 36 plus years. For the Senate chamber was Robert C. Byrd's cathedral. The Senate chamber was his cathedral, and West Virginia was his heaven. And there's not a lot of hyperbole in that. Every person in the Senate, as my colleagues behind you can tell you, brings something special about them. I'll never forget having privately criticized a senator when I was there the first year. I was sitting with the previous leader, Senator Mansfield, who was an incredible guy. And he told me that, he said, why are you upset? And I told him about a particular senator railing against something I thought was very worthy, the Americans with Disability Act. And he went on to tell me that every member of the Senate represented something in the eyes of their state that was special and represented a piece of their state. Well, if there was ever a senator who was the embodiment of his state, if there was ever a senator who in fact reflected his state, it was Robert C. Byrd. The fact of the matter is, the pick of the banjo, the sweet sound of the fiddle, ramp dinners in the spring, country fairs in the summer, the beauty of the laurels in the mountains, the rush of the rapids through the valleys. These things not only describe West Virginia, but from an outsider's point of view, who's been here many times at the invitation of Jennings Randolph and Robert C. Byrd, it seems to me they define a way of life. It's more than just a state. And Robert C. Byrd was the most fierce defender of not only the state, but the way of life. I think the most fierce senator that probably this state has ever known in its history. You know, Robert Byrd did use the phrase, "When I die, West Virginia will be written on my heart," and I used to kid him. I said, "You have so many Scotch-Irish down there, you don't acknowledge it was an Irish Catholic named Joyce who said that first." Reverend, he quoted everybody else, but when he used that phrase, he'd never acknowledge that it was James Joyce who said, "When I die, Dublin will be written in my heart." And all he would do is laugh. The fact of the matter is, West Virginia was not only written in his heart, but he wore it on his sleeve. He took such pride in this place. He took such pride in all of you. I remember he asked me one of the few races he had, there was a race, whether I'd come down, because I was the young guy, and I'd come down and demonstrate to everybody that I could not keep up with Robert C. Byrd, which happened to be true. And I think, Nick, you were at the dinner. We had a Jefferson Jackson Day dinner and down here, and Robert C. Byrd did something that never happened before with me in all the dinners I've spoken at. He stood up and he said, "We're honored to have Senator Joe Biden from Delaware here tonight, and Joe, I'd like to introduce you to West Virginia." Then he spent, as Nick will remember, the next probably 10 minutes talking about everyone in the audience by name, where they were from, what they had done, how they had fought through difficulty. And then he said, kind of like Johnny Carson, "Here's Joe." Well, I thought it was pretty impressive, literally. Robert C. Byrd asked me to speak, but he knew the privilege was mine, not the people to whom I was speaking. He was devoted to all of you like few senators in the 37 years I was there, 36 plus years I was there, that I have ever known. He was fiercely devoted, as you've all heard, to his principles. Even once he became power, he always spoke truth to power, standing up for the people he proudly was part of. And you've heard it many times a day, but it bears repeating again in defense of the Constitution he revered. I always wear a flag pin, but I was afraid he'd be looking down today, because every time I'd wear the flag pin on the floor, he would grab me, take my pin, and put on a Constitution pin. That's the pin I'm wearing. So, boss, I'm wearing the pin. Robert C. Byrd said many things, but he once said, "As long as there is a forum in which questions can be asked by men and women who do not stand in awe of a chief executive, and one can speak as long as one's feet will allow one to stand, the liberties of the American people will be secure." 11 presidents knew Robert C. Byrd. He served, as he pointed out, concurrently with them, not under them. And 11 presidents, where they all here and 2 are here, can attest to the fact that he always showed respect, but never deference, and he stood in awe of none. He had an incredible, prodigious memory that I will not take the time to regale you about. I just remember one time sitting with the Queen of England at a formal dinner, and he recited the entire lineage of the Tudors, and every year each one had served. And she sat there, and I thought her bonnet was going to flip off her head. It was like, what did I just hear? She learned about relatives she probably forgot she had. As also noted, Robert C. Byrd was a parliamentary library, a keeper of the institution of the Senate, and he was the institution itself. But to me, and many people here today, like guys I see, Bill Bradley and Jim Sasser, who've long left the Senate for greener pastures, and I hope better remuneration. We used to kid about that too, but for a lot of us, he was a friend, and he was a mentor, and he was a guide. Nick and I were talking a little bit earlier because Nick, I commuted every day for 36 years in the United States Senate, 250 miles a day, and Robert C. Byrd was a stickler about when he said votes. And I'd drive down from Washington, and I'd call Nick on this big old car phone I first had. It was about that big. And I'd say, Nick, I can see the dome. Hold the vote, I can see the dome. Finally, Nick caught on. He said, Joe, or Mr. Senator, how far away can you see the dome? Because he'd be the one to go to the leader and say, can you hold the vote 2 more minutes for Biden? And as long as I was behaving, he held the vote. But when I found myself in disagreement, I'd stand there to catch a 7 o'clock train. He'd set a vote for 7 o'clock. And I'd walk up to him, and I needed 7 minutes from the chamber. And Nick knows this. I'd walk up to him, I'd stand, always stood down in the well, and he stood in that first riser. And I'd say, Mr. Leader, I know we got an hour. I said, you set the vote for 7. Any possibility of setting it 10 to 7 so I could get the train? And he'd go like this. He'd look at the clock, look at me, look at the clock, and say, no. No. But that's because I misbehaved once. I voted with George Mitchell on a matter relating to minors, and that was a big mistake. He literally took the roll call sheet. There's these sheets, as the staff members know, with every senator's name and how they voted. He took the roll call sheet, had it framed, had my name circled in red, and literally had it screwed to the ornate door frame in his office then as the chairman of the Appropriations Committee. So every single senator coming to see him would walk out, and at eye height they'd see Biden circled in red, and know darn well they better not vote against Robert C. Byrd ever. You think I'm joking? I'm not joking. And then I got in his good graces. I tried to run for president. He said, I don't want any senators running for president. I said, why, Mr. Leader? He said, because you never come back and vote when I need you. So I made a promise that no matter where I was, if he called me and said he needed my vote, I'd drop whatever I was doing and I'd come. And I kept the commitment, the only one I might add. That got me back in his good graces again. The point is that this is a man who knew exactly what he was doing. After I was elected in 1972 as a 29-year-old kid, I was number 100 out of 100 in the Senate seniority. And Leader Byrd offered up, he was then the whip, he offered his office to me to come down from Delaware so I could have a place to interview staff members. It was in his office and the connection his secretary put through that I received a call telling me that about an accident which took the life of my wife and my daughter. And when they were buried, we held a memorial service a couple days later in Delaware where thousands of people showed up, and it was a bone-chilling slate day of rain, and people couldn't get in the church. And I never knew it initially, but Robert C. Byrd, and I think you may have driven him up, Nick, drove up on his own with Nick to that church. He stood outside for the better part of an hour in a driving rainstorm where the temperature was below 32. When my brother saw him and asked him to come in, he said no. He wouldn't displace anyone. He stayed there for the entire service. When the service was over, he got in his vehicle and he drove back. Never attempting to be noticed, never seeking to know, as my deceased wife used to say, the real measure of generosity is, would you do it and no one ever knew you did it? Well, Robert C. Byrd did that. I was appreciative of what he did, but I quite frankly didn't understand until a couple years later. I was in his office, and behind his desk was a huge boot cast in bronze. It was Michael's boot. It was his grandson's boot. And all of a sudden, it came so crystal clear to me who this guy was. I'd known him, but I understood immediately what he was about. For him, it was all about family. It was not just Irma, his beloved wife of 69 years. It was not just his daughters, his grandchildren, great-grandchildren, all of whom were in our prayers today. It was an awful lot of you. I'll bet if he were here, he could look out and name you, and tell you what your father or mother did for him, what your grandmother or grandfather did for him, and how you made such and such of yourself. Clearly in his own life, Robert Byrd suffered a lot of hardships. You all know the story, losing his mom, being raised and adopted by an aunt and uncle, growing up in a home without electricity or water, having to work at an early age. He had an incredible, incredible determination. One that I don't think any of my colleagues have ever witnessed, to be my guess. But you know, this man was, it wasn't just that, as President Clinton pointed out, that at age 47 as a sitting congressman, or 45, he went and got a law degree. I don't know whether you know, you probably do, Mr. President. He got that law degree without having a college degree. And at age 77, he went to Marshall University and completed his work, getting his college degree. Because to him, in my view, and I don't know, the family would tell you this, and to him, I think he felt there was something wrong with the fact that he got the law degree without graduating. He didn't need that undergraduate degree. But it was Bob Byrd, to quote John Stennis, plowing to the hedgerow and to the end of the row. The remarkable thing about him is he traveled a hard path. He devoted his life, though, to making that path a little easier for those who followed. This is a guy who continued to taste and smell and feel the suffering of the people of his state. He tasted it. That's why it was so deeply ingrained in him. It wasn't just a moral obligation. This guy remembered. And he unapologetically, has been pointed out, did everything to improve the lives of the people of Delaware by stealing all the money from Delaware, Tennessee, Texas, California that he could possibly get. Remember, Governor, there were 2 campaigns ago, he's getting beat up for trying to move, was it 2 campaigns ago, to have the FBI move down to West Virginia. And the national press was beating him up. And I was on the floor with him, and he just had getting ripped in a press conference about that. And he, you know how he used to grab you by the arm and walk me back, he said, "Joe, I hope they keep throwing me in the briar patch." But I tell you what, you West Virginians owe a lot of people in Delaware for a lot of money we should have gotten and you got. I just want you to know that. So be nice to the rest of us. And by the way, if you doubt it, you just drive here. You cross the Robert C. Byrd Drive, the Robert C. Appalachian Highway, the Robert C. Library Learning Center, the Robert C. Byrd Clinic, the Robert C. Federal Building in Charleston, and on and on and on. But ladies and gentlemen, of course, it's more than the name we're not going to forget. It's his courage. He died like he lived. He died like he lived his life. He never stopped fighting. How many people would have hung on as long as he did? How many people would have had the ability to get back out of that hospital bed and get in a wheelchair and come in and vote for this? He never stopped thinking about his people and the things he cared about. Speaking several weeks ago, this week actually, when Robert Byrd said, quote, Like Jefferson and Adams, I'm inspired to continue serving the land I love to the very best of my abilities for the whole of my years. Well, he served the land he loved. He served the people he loved. He served the people who were in his blood. And because of that service, you have gained greatly. And with his loss, you're the first who will feel that loss. But it's not just West Virginia alone. It's all of us. I said of him when I learned of his death, I was on an errand for the president in Cleveland. And I said, you know, to paraphrase the poet, we shall not see his like again. Had he been there, he would have said, Joe, that's Shakespeare. Hamlet, Act 1, Scene 2. And the actual quote is, I shall not look upon his like again. Mr. Leader, we're not going to look upon your like again. I'm not even going to ask God to bless you because he already has, and I know where you are. And may God bless your family. May God bless this state and this country, and may God protect our troops. Thank you.